tweet-length version of this, the one-line version of this, is that if he wanted to undo Donald Trump, if he wanted to use his position of power to destroy the campaign of Donald Trump, there was a very clear course of action for him to take that he did not take.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. You know what I find fascinating about this? Juxtapose this person who we saw today, standing there for the honor of the FBI, showing how he used his integrity. Yes, he said private things as a citizen, but he also stood up for the First Amendment. I was quite pleased with that. But on the other hand, juxtapose that with his boss, Director Comey, who went out and made statements about Hillary Clinton.
Right.
He didn't keep his mouth shut at a time that he really should have. And so we have a guy in charge of the counterintelligence division who understood the severity
yes.
of what was going on, what could arguably be the single most important investigation in American history, and he kept the faith of the Bureau.
By the way, I just want to be clear. I mean, as a journalist, I want people to leak stuff to me, right? So I'm basically pro-leak. But as a citizen, as someone, the professionals in the FBI, Matt, I mean, it was right and proper, and in fact, incredibly important that that investigation be kept as secret as it was, which he and his cohort appears to have done.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was obvious by October of 2016, it was fairly obvious from anyone that knows how the department works that the Trump campaign was under investigation. Paul Manafort had to leave the campaign because he was under investigation. The hacks were public. So it was clear that if you were going to investigate the hacks, and if you were looking at Paul Manafort, who had spent a long time working with Russian cutouts in Ukraine, that you were going to be taking a look at the campaign too. But not only did the FBI not publicly confirm it, at the same time they were sending that letter that confirmed the renewed investigation in the Clinton campaign, but they went out of their way to knock down stories about the investigation. They went out of their way to convince reporters that there was no investigation going on, or that any investigation hadn't turned anything up, which, by the way, is the appropriate thing to do. You want them to do that. You wanted to do it in both cases, of course, and that's not what they did in the campaign, and I think that's why, that is why we're here today with Donald Trump as president.
It also strikes me as someone who has a long career in counterintelligence, working specifically on Russian intelligence operations, has been essentially taken offline by this ceaseless character assassination of the guy who, by the way, if you happen to watch Trump TV, this guy is public enemy number one.
Yeah, and you know who this man is? That's America's top spy hunter. That's who he is. He's the man that finds enemies within the United States, whether they're members of ISIS, whether they're members of Al-Qaeda, or whether they're hostile intelligence agencies. You have to understand, I think it's important for this administration to take him down because they're pretty close to foreign intelligence. We know some people have spoken with Russians. The Russians really, really must be very pleased today to see that America's top internal security hunter is now being ripped apart. And what I loved about the hearing today, it sort of reminded me, I think the Republicans really wanted one of those Saddam Hussein-like show trials where you bring the guy out and you chastise him and you throw a shoe at him. But we hit the guardrails of democracy today. You saw the opposition furious. You saw the man defend himself and the First Amendment, and it was not a spectacle, but it was a show.
By the way, I want to just say, I mean, the idea that the FBI would never do wrong or they would never be biased in pursuing an allegation is ridiculous. Law enforcement gets stuff wrong all the time. It's animated by bias all the time, Matt. But I kept thinking the whole time, Bob Goodlatte says it's equal justice under law. Do you want to read the texts of ICE agents about the people that they're investigating? Do you want to read the texts of local police officers about the people they're investigating? What do you think law enforcement says in private about the people they're investigating?
That is absolutely right. When you look at many of the logical fallacies here, the FBI, most of the people they're investigating, they presume that they're guilty. That doesn't mean they eventually charge them with something or recommend charges. They only do that if they find evidence. But they think all kinds of negative things about the people that they're investigating. And by the way, if you pulled the texts of members of Congress, Republican members of Congress during the campaign and see what they said about Donald Trump, I bet a lot of them would be pretty similar to what these members said. I want to say one thing about what Malcolm said about what you saw Peter Strzok today and Peter Strzok's record. Especially when you contrast it to some of the members of these committee who were spending their time attacking him. Jim Jordan, who right now is credibly accused of looking the other way as a doctor sexually assaulted wrestlers who were in his charge. Tom Marino, a member of Congress who was a former U.S. attorney, and as U.S. attorney gave a character reference to a mobster who his own office was investigating. Scott DeHarlis, who as a doctor had an affair with his patients in violation of medical ethics and then pressured one of them to have an abortion. These are the members who are now coming out and lecturing Pete Strzok on what is the appropriate behavior in the workforce. It is galling to watch.
Someone tweeted this earlier to Matt's point. I mean, that was part of it also is, can you imagine a sweep of the 2016 texts of a random person in the federal bureaucracy, in Capitol Hill, of a member of Congress, and what grist that would be for a hearing?
Oh, and I just find it fascinating that Republicans understand that, but they appear to have the only people who have a right to, freedom of speech. Everybody else has a right to have their texts scanned through and determine their bias. Let me tell you something. I know a lot of guys in the Bureau. The Bureau was pretty much in the tank, a lot of them, for Donald Trump. They love Donald Trump. The New York office is famous for that. But they don't, I really believe, they do not allow that to, when they start bloodhounding, they don't allow that to color their investigation.
That point about the Bureau's color, Peter Strzok answered a question at one point from one of the members in which he said, the Bureau is law and order, conservative, and overwhelmingly Republican, as a description of the makeup of the Bureau, which makes, in some senses, the kind of head-spinning, we've always been at war with Eurasia, part of this remarkable from the Republicans as they basically continue to sort of portray the Bureau as this kind of leftist cabal.
Yeah, for anyone that has ever worked with the Bureau and knows FBI agents, it is an absurd characterization. They are conservative. But one of the things about them being conservative, I think people need to understand, I hear Democrats say this all the time, oh, they're Republicans, you couldn't trust them to conduct these investigations fairly. Yes, you can. Even though they're conservative, most of them will conduct, they conducted the investigation into Hillary Clinton, I think, very fairly. They're conducting the investigation into Donald Trump fairly. Where you will see it break down sometimes is you will see leaks about people that they are investigating, but that happens in a partisan way. It also happens in all kinds of cases that they're investigating. Usually it's not because of partisan motives. And I will say, for all the characterization of the Bureau being so pro-Republican or so strongly Republican, I think that is an idea that has weakened somewhat over the last few months. If you talk to FBI agents now, many of them are Republicans who are very, very upset about Donald Trump and are very, very upset about the way Republicans on the Hill are attacking the Bureau for political gain.
Peter Strzok basically said as much today in his testimony.
Yeah, let me stand up for the Bureau again, okay? These guys, when they get onto the hunt, okay, left, right, or center, they don't care who the target is. I think what's happening here, and if we're seeing a transition with these people, and maybe this is why the Republicans are going so hard at the Bureau, is that they know they will be in trouble if they come up with real evidence. And they will throw partisanship out the window, and they will be the bloodhounds that we task them to be.
There's a fear, there's a fear for that, and then it also seems to me to laying the groundwork to basically say whatever comes out of this process is tainted, so that whatever evidence is produced in the end, you don't have to listen to at the end of the Mueller investigation. Matt Miller and Malcolm Nance, thank you both. That was great.